Good morning from Boston, and good afternoon and good evening for those of you who are joining from Europe, the Middle East, India, Hong Kong, and other parts of the world. My name is Bob Dietrich. I'm the Senior Associate Vice President for Advancement at Northeastern, and part of my responsibility at the university is to work with the president, our college deans, and our alumni and parents here in the States and from all over the world to help make sure that Northeastern is advancing as a truly global university. So I'm particularly pleased to see so many people from all over the world joining us today. On behalf of Dunton Family Dean Raj Echambadi and the D'Amore-McKim School of Business, it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here today for today's program, which will feature three distinguished international leaders of business who share their insights about privately held and publicly held global businesses. Talk a little bit about the role that these businesses play on the world stage, and a little bit about how the pandemic has impacted their businesses and what it means for the future. In a moment, I'll turn the program over to Dean Echambadi, but first let me briefly introduce our three panelists. First, we're pleased to have Henadi Al-Saleh, Chairperson of Agility Logistics Corporation, with us today. Henadi is a member of our extended Northeastern family. She's actually the aunt of two Huskies, Mohammed, who graduated from the D'Amore-McKim School of Business this past spring, and Abdullah, who graduated from the College of Engineering in 19. I just told Henadi that her brother, Essa, father of Mohammed and Abdullah, is registered for the event, and he's joining us from Switzerland. So welcome, Essa. Also joining us from Hong Kong is Anil Mahtani, a proud parent of three Huskies, Trishna, CAMD, or College of Arts, Media and Design, 2017, Ashwin, who's studying business with us, and Azara, who just began her Northeastern journey with us. Andy is a second generation leader of his family business, Maxwell's Clothiers, he has grown into a global business with nearly 1 million clients worldwide. Finally, we're pleased to have Meher Pudumjee from India. Meher is chairperson of Thermax Limited and represents the third generation family leadership of a large, diversified, and now publicly held company. She's a good friend of the university, introduced to us actually by the Honorable Nani Burns, an alumna of our law school and a trustee emerita. So I want to welcome all of our panelists, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. Although I'm sure all of you are very familiar at this point, after 9 months or so of the new normal, the Zoom platform, but let me just briefly go through some guidelines for today's event. First, we invite you to turn your cameras on if you wish to. But we ask you to leave your mics muted to avoid any feedback. Our program is scheduled for 1 hour. The first 30 to 40 minutes will be a moderated discussion among our panelists, moderated by Dean Echambadi, and the last 20 to 30 minutes will be dedicated to your questions. So we invite you, as you think of your questions, to post them to the chat room, and the chat logo is on the bottom toolbar of your screen. My colleague Ann Nielsen and I will collect those and present them on your behalf in the last half of our event. And then finally, as many of you probably noticed when you logged in, this meeting is being recorded and will be up on our YouTube channel in just a few days. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dean Raj Echambadi to launch our program. Raj?
Thank you, Bob. Greetings from Boston. I want to thank our global audience here for being here. Please send us your questions. And I'm very excited to talk to the three illustrious panelists. You are phenomenal ambassadors of what leadership looks like. So very excited to have this conversation. So I want to start off with a similar question to Meher and Andy. And I want to start off by asking you to share a little bit about your businesses, when it was founded, what generation are you representing at this point in time, and any business transitions that you want to talk about. Meher, Could you start us off first?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Raj. And thanks everyone for inviting me on this panel. It's lovely to be here with all of you. So I'm based in India and in a place called Pune, about 100 miles from Mumbai. I belong to the third generation in the family. The business is called Thermax Limited. It is in the energy and environment space. So we heat, we cool, we clean, we power, we recycle, we use waste to move it into energy. So we are sort of the, if you like, the utilities for a customer. And then we also clean up the mess created by production. And the business was started by my grandfather. This is my maternal grandfather. It was started in 1966 with a collaboration with a company in Belgium called Wonson. And it's actually when the collaboration ended, that's when we changed the name from Wonson to Thermax Limited out of India. My father, who was a professional, joined the company and later met and married my mother and therefore became the son-in-law. So from my grandfather, the business actually went across to my father. And then from my father for a short while, after he passed away, unfortunately, very suddenly in 1996, my mom managed the business. And after she retired in 2004, the board appointed me as the chairperson of the company. And so I am in a non-executive position as non-executive chairperson. We have a professional, non-family MD and CEO who runs our business. So he is there on a day-to-day basis. I chair the board. And my husband is in the business with me. So it's a very small family. It's my husband, my mother, myself, till my mother retired, and now it's Firoz and me. And we have two children, Zahan, who is 25, who has just entered the family business in February this year, and Leah, who is 21 and is in her fourth year at New York University. Thank you.
Thanks, Meher. I also want to point to our audience that your mother, Mrs. Anu Aga, is actually in the audience here. So very excited to have her, very honored to have her as part of our audience. Now, Andy, could you take the same question, talk about your business, when it was founded, the transition, and of course, what generation you belong to?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone here in Hong Kong. Maxwell Clothiers is in essence a privately owned family business, which was started by my father in 1961. My father came to Hong Kong, which was at that time a British colony in the mid-50s, 1950s, and immediately started working for a established tailoring company here in Hong Kong before saving enough money to open his own business. Custom tailored clothing became one of the most famous products that Hong Kong produced, and that is still true till this day. The reason the tailoring business thrived here was a combination of arrivals into Hong Kong of two groups. One was a highly skilled set of tailors, primarily from Shanghai, who came to the city as refugees just before the 1949 revolution in China, and a vast number of spirited entrepreneurs who came from other parts of the British Empire and eventually set up shop here in the city. With the tourism boom in Hong Kong in the 1960s and onwards, there was an endless stream of customers coming here, whether the client was a sightseer or coming for business meeting or family visits. The first thing that a visitor would do would call up his or her tailor. And usually in those days, you would come in the morning, select your fabric, come back in the afternoon and get your fittings done and have your clothing picked up the very next day. So that's the famous Hong Kong 24-hour suit was born. I'm second generation in the business, having joined my father in 1990. That's about 30 years ago. After a career in software engineering at General Dynamics in San Diego, I graduated from USC with a degree in computer science. The switch to the tailoring business was fairly smooth. As a child and a teenager, I did spend endless hours at my father's shop and learned a lot about fabrics, tailoring techniques, style, and most importantly, how to build relationship with customers. Our business model changed in early 1970s with the introduction of the traveling tailor trunk show, whereby rather than waiting for your clients to come see you in Hong Kong, you would pack a couple of suitcases or trunks, I would say, fabric samples, and travel from city to city to meet and service your customers overseas and take orders for custom clothing. This part of the business became known as the mail order trade, which is now actually the primary source of our revenue. Currently, we serve customers in over a dozen countries, including the US, Canada, UK, Europe, Australia, and Singapore. Yeah, so that's in a nutshell, that's our business right now.
No, thank you, Andy. And over to Henadi. Your business, Agility, is different from Maxwell, Clothiers, and Thermax. So could you talk a little bit about the evolution, the growth and expansion of Agility, and potentially some milestones in your company?
Definitely. And first, thank you for having me in this panel. If I think about agility in our history, really, I trace it back to 1997 when we were owned by the government. It was back then when we were a small local company where the government decided to privatize us. We had a strategic holder acquire us. The government retained around the 20% holding, and the rest was distributed to the public shareholders. With that lead investor, the company grew quite rapidly over the next decade, I'd say up until about 2007. With a small sort of corporate office and headquarters, we were able to grow from a company with around 5,000 employees to close to 30,000. We're able to grow from 2 countries to be present in over 100 countries, and grow our revenues from, I'd say, around $100 million, close to $5 billion. But if I think about the growth of that business and the way where we landed back in 2008 and 9, really forced us to think how we needed to manage the business. So we changed the way we were set up. We changed to become sort of what we call a strategic holder, a strategic shareholder. So we had the corporate office, which is still the same management that we had back in 1997. And we're able to break down the operating businesses into core operating units and place CEOs and CFOs in a management board with that specialization, with that sort of specific operating know-how to grow the company in an agile way for the next 10 years to where we landed today. So this is a little bit about agility in our history.
No, thank you, Henadi. So now I want to transition from the origins of your respective companies to striking a balance. You know, obviously, when you talk about family businesses, decision making can be very complex because you are navigating both the good for the family and good for the business, etc. So Andy, I want to start off with you and talk about how you have navigated this dual role of doing what is good for the family and what is good for the business.
Yeah, naturally, when joining an existing family establishment, your first instinct is to see how you can contribute and enhance the business. Being an only child also led to a lot of pressure, proving to myself and to my father how we can continue to be a successful tailoring company. When I came in, I had a lot of ideas on marketing, organizational changes, improving the product quality, improving the production efficiency. Obviously, it took time to sell these new modern ideas to my father, who was set in his old traditional ways of conducting business. You know, along the way, there were occasional conflicts and disagreements between us. But in the end, my father realized that changes were indeed required and beneficial in order to allow our business to thrive in the future. You know, small examples would be like when I got in, we bought our first fax machine back in 89, 90, I guess. We got onto the internet and started communicating with our clients by email. when email was very much in its infancy. I introduced a new premium line of clothing so we can capture a more affluent set of clients. So a lot of these things, changes were introduced, and all of them proved quite beneficial down the road for our business.
So I want to move to Meher. Your company is different from Maxwell in the sense that you are a public company. So obviously, when you're talking about public companies, you need to manage the short-term expectations of the shareholders versus the long-term interests of the family business. So Meher, could you shed some light on how you navigate this delicate balance? At least from my point of view, it appears to be a delicate balance, and how does decision-making work in these kinds of situations?
So Raj, yeah, it is definitely a paradox in terms of short-term versus long-term. Having said that, it's in some ways, it's like a game of tennis. You know, do you look at the scoreboard, which is like looking at quarterly earnings, or do you concentrate on the game, which is basically the long term? And so, of course, you need to concentrate on the game, which is the main thing, but with an eye on the scoreboard. So it's sort of balancing the two, which really is important. And I'd also say that there are some shareholders who want to invest in companies that look at the long term. They invest for a longer time. I think those are the kind of investors that a company like Thermax attracts more than those who want to get in and out. You know, it's like some employees feel more comfortable and thrive in one environment rather than in another environment. Similarly, some shareholders thrive in some and they don't thrive in others. So we like to believe that we do look much more at the longer term. We are also much more focused not on just the shareholder, but on our stakeholders, and we always have been. So our shareholder is one of the constituents. We have our employees, we have our customers, we have our society, we have our community, and we have the environment. So, and of course our vendors. So we like to look at it holistically rather than just shareholder value. And maybe as an example in terms of how decisions are made, about 10 years ago, we had an opportunity and we wanted to enter a business which was build, own, and operate. So for example, instead of selling a boiler, we sell steam. Or instead of selling a chiller, we sell cooling. So at that time, we took a decision, and it was predominantly the family and then backed up by the board in terms of we will only look at green assets. So I remember many of our people in the organization said we're being very myopic and we will not be able to enhance the business as much because green means, and 10 years ago means the amount of business would be much less. They also said it will take a much longer time to build up that asset base. But we stuck to our guns and we said, no, this business is going to be pure green. And I'm very happy to say that 10 years down the line, okay, we haven't grown as much, but I feel comfortable that we made an impact, positive impact on the environment. So I think there's a balance that's required, but it's predominantly long term.
Thank you. Actually, it's very interesting that people talked about Thermax being myopic when actually it was the opposite. You actually broke marketing myopia because you understood what business you were going to be in the long term. So I want to move to Henadi here. You have a diversity of shareholders, a couple of them who are huge, and then diversity in terms of your shareholding patterns among other people, etc. So the question for you along the same line of striking the balance is, how do you think about strategically reinvesting in your business versus the dividend yield philosophy that your shareholders might come to expect of you?
I think what Meher said resonates very strongly and very similarly to agility. And it's really a tough balance, I think for all companies in managing shareholder expectations for cash dividends and sort of long-term requirements to reinvest within the business. From our perspective, agility is listed on both the Kuwait Stock Exchange and the Dubai Financial Market, which is very much a dividend yield driven market. And more specifically, they're extremely interested in cash dividends. But I'd say as responsible managers of the company, our priority is really to drive and create value not simply for the short term, but also in the long term. So the way we see it is, if we can create more value than prevailing market returns, we've earned the right to ask the shareholders and stakeholders to seek the retention of money within the corporation. And then with that in mind, we build our goals, we build our strategy, we build our capital investment program, we strongly align it with the board, we communicate it very closely with all of our stakeholders, and use that to manage market expectations. And that's a framework in which we manage between short to long-term strategies, investments.
Thank you. So now I want to transition to the future. And again, this question is going to be similar for both Meher and Andy. I want to talk a little bit about the future generation in your family. What do you envision their role is in the business moving forward? And more importantly, as a general piece of advice to people who are listening in, what is your advice about succession planning in family businesses? What are some of the best practices that you can think of? Meher, I'm going to start off with you.
Sure. So I think it's for a family business. First of all, I think it's always really important for the best person to run the business. All our eggs are in this one basket. And therefore, you really want the best to run it. I remember when I joined, I came back from, I wasn't at Northeastern. I finished my engineering from Imperial College and came back to India. And I joined the family business immediately. Both my parents didn't push us into joining the business, but I'm sure there was a subtle pressure, or they were very happy when we actually did. And I started off as an engineer trainee, and then sort of obviously over time circumstances changed, and then I moved to the board very quickly. And soon the company wasn't doing very well. And so we brought in a consultant who made a lot of changes in the organization. And at that time I was executive. My husband Firoz was an executive, and so was my mother, all three of us. And we had many executives, 9 of us on the board of the company, and just 4 independent directors. And at that time, the consultant that came in suggested that they made many changes in the organization. And one of them was that the family needs to decide that they are on the board in a non-executive role or off the board as executives and continue in the day-to-day operations. So Firoz and I and Anu took a decision that we would be off the day-to-day running, and we would remain on the board. And so I think that's how we moved to a non-executive role. Now, I came straight into the business. If I had to advise my children, and I did advise my son, both Feroz and I felt very strongly that Zahan should actually work elsewhere before he comes into the business. So he actually joined us for a year, and this was in one of our facilities overseas. And then we had a chat with him saying that, I didn't take on that opportunity, but I think it's great for you to be a nobody in someone else's business, for you not to be Mrs. Aga's grandson or Mrs. Pudumjee's son, and for you to just know what it's like to really work hard elsewhere. And so he joined Bain and was there for a year and a half. And I think that made a very big difference. And he then joined us back in February this year. And so I think in terms of succession for the family, I would genuinely say that it's a great thing to go out there, work for a few years before you come back into the family business. And I would also say that the best person should be the person that runs the day-to-day operations. It might be a family person if he or she is best suited. It may not be a family person. In our case, both Feroz and I definitely felt that I think this business is better off in the hands of an external non-family person running it on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's a really good decision that we've made.
Thank you, Meher. Andy?
Yeah.
Could you shed some light on the future of how Maxwell's is going to evolve?
Sure. I mean, I do share similar sentiments that Meher had indicated as well. I mean, we are a private family business. A lot of decisions basically primarily made by myself. We have a managerial team. We have a salesperson team as well, and everyone contributes and shares ideas on how to evolve and grow the business. I mean, moving forward to the future direction of our business, we will continue to incorporate the same business philosophy and principles, improving our product quality, improving our customer experience and service. In order to scale our business, I think Meher is right. I'm not as qualified, I would try to source or seek somebody to come from a veteran of the industry to come in and look at our business and see what other improvements and that can be applied in order to scale our business. I know now the application of new technology and a lot of the digital experiences can be high on every company's agenda list. And I think that might be the path to go. As far as future generations in the business, I will let my children make those decisions on their own. They're still young, so I would encourage them to continue to enhance their educational experience, deeply follow their passions first, before deciding whether they want to come into the family business. There's absolutely no pressure for them to join the family business at this time, actually.
Perfect, thank you. Henadi, for you, one of the questions I wanted to think about was about your views on the evolving stakeholder view. Meher alluded to it earlier in her answer, where they have moved from just purely a shareholder view to a stakeholder view, etc. Could you talk about the evolving views at Agility?
Absolutely. So from our perspective, our stakeholders are not simply the shareholders, but they're the shareholders, the employees, the suppliers, the banks. And throughout the years, what is a priority for them in turn gets placed on the top of our agenda. And I'll give you two examples throughout the years in which we've been able to demonstrate that. So if I think about the 2008-9 financial crisis, cash was at the top of everyone's mind. And back then, Agility was in a position, even though we didn't have to, we paid down all of our banking debt, even though it wasn't in the covenants, because a lot of the banks who are very close stakeholders of ours who supported us through years of growth were getting nervous. So that was quite critical. Even within that year, we paid out dividends and committed to our shareholders that for the next 3 years, there would be a floor on cash dividends, which was quite unique during that time. And I look at another sort of point in time this year in 2020. Some of the critical priorities for our stakeholders is really alongside the SDGs. It's always been important for us, but it's really thrusted it to the forefront. So there were a lot of activities which we undertook this year to really accentuate that. A few examples is, in Dubai, we moved to a sort of a renewable energy at scale, which we had already followed this with Singapore, which we did last year. Another example is we supported quite a few NGOs and governments alongside, food and supply chain relief. We're able to invest in a really interesting green tech technology called Halion. And with all these activities, Evocados has ranked us, in the top 10% of companies for sustainability performance. And also we've been qualified in the FTSE for Good index. So this is just, a few examples of how what matters to our stakeholders, really gets placed as a priority on our agenda.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions to ask you still, but I see a lot of questions in the chat box. So I'm going to hand it over to Bob Dietrich so that he can ask questions from the audience of our panelists. Bob?
Thank you. Yes, we have a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is probably directed to you, Meher. India recently passed a quota on board membership involving women. Is this changing the culture for the better in your board and boards in general?
Yeah, India did pass this, where we have to have one lady member on the board, and it cannot be a member of the family. It has to be someone who's an independent director. So I don't count as being that woman on our board. We have yet another lady who's an independent director. I genuinely feel that all kinds of diversity is helpful, whether it be gender diversity, whether it be geographical diversity, religious diversity, cognitive diversity. I mean, just any form of diversity, I think, just adds to the richness of any discussion at a board level or in a company. And I wasn't too happy with the fact that they had made this quota at the board level, because I always feel that it's important to sort of start at the bottom, at the supply end, and have a larger supply base, and then sort of you move up. But that, of course, is for women within the company. At the board level, obviously, an independent director cannot move up from the organization. You have to have it from the outside. And so I think it's made a difference to many companies. The only challenge that we have right now is that the supply is so limited. So it's the same women who are sort of churning and part of different boards. So it is a challenge, because we also have, you can only be on 7 publicly listed company boards, which also is a lot. But still, so it becomes a big challenge in terms of getting good, competent women to get onto boards of companies.
Henadi, I might turn this gender question to you now. Yours is obviously a global business, but you're located in a region that has traditionally been dominated by large family businesses, mostly led by men. And I'm wondering if you could comment on the changes in the region. Your neighbor in Saudi Arabia, over the last decade, they've allowed women to work in retail, and more recently, the freedom to drive. What's your views on the role of women in business, in public life, on governing boards, etc.?
Well, I think they're absolutely essential. But I think it's, so if I look at the region, and especially Kuwait, where I'm from, is what people don't realize is, and when it comes to women, there is a large pool of well-educated women. I mean, from the literacy rates to the percentage of women graduating from colleges, much higher than men in Kuwait, and also in entering into sort of their first career. If I look at the percentage of women working within the government sector in Kuwait, far exceeds that of men. But the problem that you see is as they climb up the ranks, the numbers start to shift and they completely flip over. So from my perspective, I think it's critical for any corporation or country or region, which is slowly coming into place over here, is how do we set up the right infrastructure and policies to support women in sort of climbing up that ladder and not shying away and being able to commit to whatever obligations they have and the work obligations.
Thank you. Thank you. Another question that we have is, outside of COVID, one of the big themes is corporations with purpose and to focus on things other than shareholders and family business owners. What's your sense of current practices and standards of non-financial disclosure?
Henadi, do you want to take it first?
Sure, absolutely. So I think more and more regulation or the regulatory bodies are enforcing this when it comes to disclosing, all of our CSR activities. Even today, if you approach some of the banks will actually ask you, to commit to a certain sort of SDG, and within that ratchet, they might, change the margin within that bank debt, if you achieve it. On a personal level, I think it's really important. I think it's really important that your stakeholders, not simply your stakeholders, but your goals embody something beyond cash profitability and extend into sort of sustainable development goals or whatever it may be, the environment. I look at us as an organization, and that for us, we've made certain commitments around CO2 emissions and the reduction of CO2 emissions, especially given the fact that we're a global logistics company. So I think it's I think it's a positive move, moving towards disclosing and talking about it and raising it as a top priority.
Can I add a little bit also to it, Bob?
Please.
So I completely agree with Henadi in the sense that I think it's important really that we look beyond financial disclosures, whether you're private or public. I think it's really important to be transparent. ESG has come in a very big way. So whether you look at the environment, whether you look at your social commitments, and whether you look at governance. And I think in a country like India, all three are very critically important. So do we want to grow at any cost, or do we want to grow with some purpose? In fact, my father would often say that profit is not just a set of figures, but of values. And in a country like India, I think that that really resonates with us. And that's how we followed our governance practices within the organization. And this whole thing about having a purpose. So it's not just about profit maximization at any cost, but can we have a purpose? And I think more and more people are beginning to realize that purpose is really what's important. It drives every stakeholder in the organization. And in fact, right now as we speak, I'm putting together something for our board for our retreat in March, which is what is really the purpose of this company? What are we here for? Why are we here? and how does it impact every stakeholder. So I'm actually quite looking forward to putting this document together.
There's been a couple of questions on the chat about the current COVID pandemic and the kind of impact it's had on your businesses and your regions. Andy, would you like to comment on that topic first?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, yeah, as our business is primarily dependent on travel and face-to-face consultations with our clients. Since the travel restrictions and social distancing measures came into effect earlier this year, our sales team has been able to conduct our regular trunk shows to the over 50 cities worldwide, which we visit pretty much twice a year. This year, our revenue has been greatly impacted due to the low volume of orders being processed at our Hong Kong production facility. Since mid-April, we were also forced to apply a 2-day work week for all our employees in order to reduce costs. Naturally, the effect on our balance sheet has been tremendous. The key was to manage our overhead and expenses by stretching our capital reserves as much as possible. At this time, we don't see a return to our normal business model probably until the second quarter of 2021. A big plus point I must add is that our digital business has started to evolve, and we have allocated a lot more resources to our online presence by redeveloping our website and social media platforms. Naturally, it's difficult to sell custom tailored shirts and suits online because ours is a touch and feel type of product and service. However, we've been able to service our existing clients on file and assist with their wardrobe requirements by email, video conferencing, and so forth. We've even gone to the extent of mailing fabric packets to our clients and letting them choose and pick their fabrics and letting us know what they would like to order. So yeah, the COVID has had a deep impact, apart from all the other issues that we deal with politically, whether it comes to fair trade, and now there's a whole topic about cotton sourcing from Xinjiang province in China. So a lot of those also have an impact, but I think so far greatly COVID has had the biggest impact on our business, and we hope to get back on track next year. Let's see what happens. Yeah.
Henadi, do you want to comment on how COVID has affected your logistics and shipping businesses?
Oh, wow. Listen, I mean, as much as COVID is a sort of a health crisis, it's also a supply chain crisis. You know, looking at what we went through this year, we had 4 focus areas. You know, one is sort of our customer crisis management. You know, we had to work very closely with our customers, you know, throughout the year. First, you know, managing their supply chains quite intimately, you know, with the reduction in capacity alongside air freight. And now the same thing is happening alongside ocean freight. And we expect that to continue, especially as, you know, the vaccine gets distributed globally. So it's, you know, this has been a critical factor for us and a focus area in managing it quite intimately. And then the other 3 perspectives that we had to really focus on, one was our employee safety. We moved 90% of our workforce, the 26,000 workforce, to work from home. And we were able to do that quite successfully. And then we had to focus on sort of our organizational resilience. We need to make sure that we're not only operating today, but we're going to be here in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Unfortunately, we had some of our businesses which were extremely hit. You know, we were in the airport ground handling business and various other businesses. We had to reduce costs by $150 million, you know, on an annual run rate. But that's put us on strong footing, you know, but, you know, by the end of this year and going forward, and, you know, has put us in a position where we can reinvest and grow and come out of this quite strongly. And then I'd say the last part is really around community support. we've given a lot of pro bono work for the World Health Organization. We've been able to donate warehousing space to stockpile critical supplies in lots of the key countries. We've been working with the UNICEF, in different countries to distribute PPEs. So that's how we've been sort of navigating COVID in 2020 and looking forward to see what happens in 21.
Meher, what are your thoughts on COVID and also on post-COVID? How will it change your business model moving forward?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's no business other than probably pharma and food and beverages that hasn't been affected by COVID, and possibly specialty chemicals. I think these three have done okay even through COVID. But being in the capital goods sector, obviously consumer demand has come down over these last 6 months. And therefore, if you don't have a demand, you don't have the need for investment. And therefore, probably till September this year, we saw that the investment cycle was pretty low. But post that, we are seeing a pickup, and we're seeing a pickup in many sectors, not just food and beverage and pharma and chemicals, which I think is a good sign. But is this sort of a pent-up demand, which is happening as a one-time, or is it going to be sustainable, is yet to be seen. I think we just have to wait and watch. And for us as well, I remember in March, and March is our year end in India. And for capital goods, a lot of the invoicing takes place in the last month and in the last few weeks of a financial year. And then came the 23rd of March, and there was that lockdown that was announced in India. So suddenly we could not invoice anything that we wanted to or that we had planned for in the last 2 weeks. So it impacted not only this financial year, but even the last financial year, 1920. And then, of course, we had to change budgets so many times. And we decided as a board that this year we would really focus on 2 factors. One is the health and safety of our people, and number 2 is cash flow. And that's really what we would focus on as the key metrics for this year. And so I think that's what we have done. And as Henadi said, for working from home very suddenly, I remember talking about working from home to increase the number of women in our industry 2 years ago. And many people laughed at it, saying that, oh my God, this is a very alien concept. Yet, I think all of us had to do it overnight. And remember, in India, again, people live in very tiny flats. People live with their in-laws in joint families. The children were at home all this while without schools being open. And so it was pretty tough. But I would say that many of our people managed remarkably well. And so a challenge will hopefully be turned into an opportunity going forward. In terms of hopefully we'll be able to get more and more women to work for the organization going forward. And of course, one of the things that again, for a capital goods company, was that we couldn't go and commission many of our units when the customer was ready during these 9 months. So we learned to do it remotely. And I think that's thanks to technology, and a huge change, which will hold us in good stead going forward. And of course, because we've seen such wonderful, clean, healthy air in these last few months, and of course, Biden coming in, we hopefully see a change in terms of the whole sustainability, climate change, moving to green. So I look forward to all that going forward.
Great. Just a couple more questions, and then I want to make sure Dean Raj has an opportunity to ask any other questions he hasn't had an opportunity to ask of you quite yet. Each of you lives in a region undergoing major changes, some encouraging, some discouraging and worrisome. Just generally speaking, what's your view? Are you optimistic about the future in terms of the role that your regions play in the overall global economy? Andy, do you want to start us off on that question?
Sure, absolutely. We seem to be in the news a lot this past year, and since last year, our city has experienced a major political protest coming off last year with laws being changed here in Hong Kong. Again, a brief history of Hong Kong. Was a British colony prior to 1997 and was handed back to the People's Republic of China. For the most part, I think for an average business person here in Hong Kong and for a company owner, there hasn't been much change. And from a day-to-day life point of view, there hasn't been any major impact at all. Politics aside, I think our current government has been doing a fantastic job. We have great infrastructure in Hong Kong. We have a huge labor pool right across the border as well. There's advances in technology in any aspect of industry. So things are actually moving fairly fast here, and the recovery, even from the COVID perspective, has been pretty good out here in this region. There were a lot of strict measures put into place, and I think that has paid off for Asia for the most part, in particular China and Hong Kong. Although we are going through a bit of a fourth wave here in Hong Kong, there have been clusters of outbreaks in various parts of the city. But the government has been very prudent and very adamant. We do have mandatory masks requirements for everyone here in the city. As of Thursday, our restaurants are being shut at 6 p.m. All fitness centers are being shut for a couple of weeks. Anytime there's a small outbreak, we do go into these emergent situations. But as far as business and the impact it's had, we seem to be managing okay, and we hope to come out of it as soon as possible, or when the vaccine program commences and we get going again. And everyone's eager to travel here, and I know the holidays are going to be a bit of a boredom here, without the typical trip to Bali or Phuket for us here.
Henadi, your thoughts on your region and the challenges and the opportunities on the global stage?
Well, given the region that I'm from, I think it wasn't really the health crisis, which was a major crisis. It was really the oil prices. That was like the predominant crisis that, we had to face and, come to terms with. And I think the governments in the region, all at different levels, took this as a critical opportunity to make drastic changes, from the implementation of a VAT tax to really thinking about what is my government sort of, most of these governments employ most of the population. How do they change that sort of that expense within their budgets? And some tough decisions have been made. And a lot of governments have taken this opportunity. They have 10, 15-year plans looking at how do I expedite and roll that out and make really tough calls in a time of need. So these are a few of the opportunities that governments have jumped on. I must admit, not enough. We need to move a lot faster and make a lot faster decision making, but we'll see how that goes in the next few years.
Thank you, Henadi. We have only about 4 minutes left, but Meher, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, sure. So I think our own city, Pune, came on the world stage because for two reasons. One, not so good, one, great. Not so good because we were like the COVID capital of India. A lot of it started in Pune, and we had many cases. But the great news is that Serum Institute, which is coming out with a vaccine, is also located in Pune. And so let's keep our fingers crossed that something good comes out of that. And I think I would say I'm probably cautiously optimistic, for the reason that I hope we don't have a second wave. And it all really depends on the vaccine. And if things go well, I think we can come out of this pretty soon. India was one of the worst hit countries, probably the worst hit. We were at minus 24% GDP. I think it was by end of September. But I think if the vaccine works, I'm pretty optimistic looking at it a year and a half down the road. Let's also face it that we have 1.3 billion people or 7 billion people on the planet that need to have this vaccine. And so it will take time, which is why I think probably 18 months, maybe even 2 years is something that one should look at.
Thank you. Dean Raj, thoughts, questions?
Thoughts, great panel. Thank you again for these wonderful comments. And as part of the audience, I got a lot of value out of it. And when we post it on YouTube, I'm sure our people who watch these videos are going to get a lot of value as well. So from my point, on behalf of D'Amore-McKim, I want to thank all of you, the panelists and the audience today. A very safe, happy, healthy holiday season. And I hope the panelists' words go to God's ears, if you will, in terms of being cautiously optimistic about the future. Again, thank you so much for a fabulous panel. And Bob, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to add my thanks to not only our panelists, but all of our participants and for the questions that you posed. And as we prepare to say goodbye to 2020, let's all hope that 2021 is happier, healthier, and safer. So with that, I think we'll close out today's program. And again, thank you very, very much, and all the best to everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.